nice and smooth. At your church, the sound engineer, the person who's mixing front of house, has a lot on their plate. One of the biggest things that they have to deal with, everybody on stage, the musicians, vocalists, everybody has a certain mix that they want to hear in their ears, and sometimes you can never get it perfect. Welcome to the Church Media Creators Show. This is where we talk about how you can leverage tech, how you can amplify the gospel, and when that's done, lives are going to change. With me, as always, is my cohort, the lovely, the talented, the extremely clean-headed, Mr. Curtis James, or shall I say Pastor Curtis? You're not a doctor yet, though, are you?
No, there's no doctor next to my name. Maybe someday, if I actually get motivated enough, we'll do that.
Okay, well, doctor or not, I'm glad you're here because this is definitely something that is right up your alley. This is an area that you excel in. I know I've done House of Front. That sounds like an offshoot of the House of Blues or something. I digress. Front of house. I've done front of house mixing off and on for my entire life. It's something I'm good at, but just so many nuances and stuff that I choose to focus on video, which apparently is a lot less cumbersome, so it would seem. But one of the things I know, when you have been leading worship, when you have been working with the people on our team, I hear these conversations going. I see people going, and they're making all these faces and stuff, and they're going, I can hear Curtis, but I can't hear Stephanie, or I hear the horns. They're really loud, but I can't hear the drums. It seems like everybody has a certain thing that they want or need to hear.
Well, monitors create a lot of problems on our stage. And so all of us who've been musicians at some point have been on stages that didn't have monitors. And you're standing up there and all you hear is just sound bouncing from all over the room. And you're trying to stay with the drums, or you're trying to stay with the worship leader, you're trying to sing the harmony part while hearing the other person sing, all those kinds of things. And so what monitors do is they fix that problem. They give us something to listen to. They're a feedback monitor that gives us this ability to listen to them and stay together. And so monitors, of course, are common. Most of our churches have some form of monitors. But
you're talking about
pose a lot of issues.
You're talking about those wedge speakers that are laying like at 45-degree angles, like in front of the microphone, or sitting right over here while the guy's playing guitar or something, right?
Right, and just for you guys to know, there's a reason they're cut at that angle. This is a side note. This will be free. It's not really what we're talking about today. They're cut at that angle because that's the exact angle that you're supposed to hold your microphone, so that your cardioid-shaped pattern microphone doesn't get feedback because it's not picking up that direction. So when I put that wedge monitor over here, I create feedback. That's just free. You can take that. But we're talking about the issues that kind of arise from monitors. So I think we've all been in situations like what Dave was just describing, where it's like, okay, I've got this person asking for more of themselves and this person asking for less of that person in the same monitor. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I navigate that? How do I work through it? But really, the biggest problem that stage monitors cause us is not just the headache of trying to mix them. It's the amount of sound that they bounce out into the room and muddy our main mix. As a matter of fact, if you're running your whole stage off of floor monitors, then there's a good chance you could reach over to your main fader and just kind of pull it down and not really tell a whole lot of overall level difference in the room, because so much of your sound is bouncing off your back wall and coming right back into the room, making a muddy, just terrible sound, muddying up all of what you're trying to do when you mix your room, because you're fighting against those monitors.
Okay, so I've seen quite a few different things. I know when we first got started at our church, when you and Jason came in and we started, revamping a lot of our worship setup, we had monitors on the floor, and then like the worship pastor would have, these in-ear monitors would be listening, and maybe the drummer did, our drummer Corbin, he bought a set that he wanted to have, so he wouldn't have a speaker in the drum cage and stuff. But it's like a hodgepodge. And now I'm trying to think. I think we have one monitor, and it's for the guy who plays saxophone, maybe. I think, isn't that right?
Yeah, right now we have a couple of things. We actually have some monitors in front of our choir, and then we have a couple in front of our horns. So we still have some floor monitors on the stage. But what we don't have is one in front of the keyboardist, one in
Right.
the drums, one on the bass, one in front of the electric guitarist, one in front of the lead guitarist, two in
Right.
front of the vocalists, you know. So
Right.
instead of having 10 monitors on our stage, now we have three or four
So
that are very specific uses.
so I know that on soundboards we have, yeah, well, I mean, thinking at the most basic level, the on the analog soundboards, I remember there being up when you go up one of the channels, you see maybe like an FX1, an FX2, or aux1, aux2, aux3, aux4, and these are sends. So what I remember learning was that you could take whatever channel that is and then send that down that chain. So if we wanted on like aux1 for our vocals, we could send our vocals all out, and then wherever they went, whether they went to a processor or, you know, to an amplifier that is those monitors or those in-ear monitors and stuff, that's how we would do it. Now I've seen at concerts, like big productions and stuff, where there's like a sound guy on the side of the stage behind a curtain or something with a soundboard as big as the guy, you know, that is in the middle of the room doing the mix and stuff. That's like a complete dedicated like mix for just the monitors and stuff. Am I right?
Yeah, the way it is basically all the signal on the stage is getting split into two different sends,
Mm-hmm.
and one of those sends is going back to the front of house board, which is the board that everybody in the room is hearing.
Right.
The other one's going to the monitor mixing board, which is a guy who's sitting off to the side, and his only job is to mix the monitors, whether through auxiliaries and his
Mm-hmm.
main faders, because that board has nothing to do with the main room mix. And in really large concert-based settings, you still see a lot of that out there. It's a traditional way to run monitors. A lot of musicians don't want to mess with monitor mixes.
Mm-hmm.
They want it done for them. And so you still see a lot of that. It's less common, largely in part because of just the technology that's available to us now. And it's far less common in churches. It's always been less common in churches. So
Mm-hmm.
dynamically, we're looking at those are two traditional old school ways to run our monitors, in a
Right.
sense that if you've got a monitor board, then you got a guy who the people on the side of the stage can give him a signal or can even walk over and talk to him and have him make changes to their monitor mix. Whereas the other way, which is most common in churches for floor monitors, is we use auxiliaries in our board, just like you described, which are independent sends that allow us to send only what needs to go to that monitor. So we're talking about monitor mixing at this point. So for instance, a keyboard player doesn't need the main mix. They need a keyboard mix. They need a
Right.
mix that has the keyboard turned up louder than anything else
Mm-hmm.
so they can hear what they're playing. And then they need maybe the lead vocalist or maybe the drummer if they can't hear the drummer, or a couple of key pieces like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the acoustic guitar. They probably don't need a lot of the electric guitar or lead or the backup vocalists, because that doesn't really help them play their instrument. And so the key is to use those auxiliaries to put only in the mix what someone needs, which is part of the challenge of it, because people are like, well, it doesn't sound good. I don't hear the electric guitars. And you're like, well,
Right.
do you need to hear the electric guitars? Well, no, I don't. Well, then why would I turn it up? Well, because I want to make sure everybody can hear the electric guitars. I'm like, no, no, no. You don't hear what I'm mixing out in the room. People really struggle with that.
Right. Yeah.
And you finally just have to tell them, look, this is just for you. We only want to hear what you need to function. And that'll help you control some of the volume issues you face. But if that keyboard is sitting right next to your drummer, they're having to have a lot of level pushed up in that monitor, and it's bouncing all over the room. And you're finding like you can't even turn the keyboard up in the room in your main mix because it's just bouncing off the walls.
Right.
And so, you know, what most churches have done, or what a lot of churches have done, is they've moved away from the traditional stage monitor setup, whether partially like we have or completely, depending on your stage setup. And they've moved to in-ear monitoring, which is, you know, the next development. You may say, well, I've been doing in-ear monitoring for 15 years. Me too. I have been doing in-ear monitoring since as long as it's been in existence. As a matter of fact, I helped consult with Aviom in some of their early stages of marketing to houses of worship. And so
Nice.
there's some great stuff out there. And there was in-ear monitoring before the in-ear monitoring we know right now, that you could really, we had it set up at my church. It was just so loud on the stage, and we had a solid wood ceiling and these walls, and we had just a full band, and we had amplifiers on stage back then. I'm talking 2001, right?
Right.
And so, which is a really long time ago. Some of you viewers are like, I wasn't even alive yet. I understand. I have two sons that weren't born when I was doing this, so that'll tell you. And one of them is a worship leader now. But like I have one of these at my house. It may actually be the one I used there. I have a headphone amplifier that was made for a studio.
Yeah.
That you plug in an input, and it has 8 outputs that are amplified, and we had headphones running off of all of those, so people would put their headphones in and they could turn their volume up and down. I mean, all kinds of things we've done to try to eliminate stage volume. But the later developments, what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years particularly, has completely changed how we monitor with the advancements in in-ear monitoring. And if your church isn't using in-ear monitoring, you probably should be. And we'll talk about why, but the main reason is so you can get full control. When you go to in-ear monitoring, you have control of your room. I used to do an event called Innovate Praise, and we would actually set up lighting, sound, and video and let it evolve through the event, because the whole event was only about technical media. And so what would happen is you would show up, the first set would be a keyboardist, an acoustic guitar, and a single vocalist on the stage. And we would use room lighting, and we would use floor monitors and all that kind of stuff. And then the next set would be a full band up there with amplifiers, live drums, all that kind of stuff, floor monitors, and then we'd add lights, and we'd add a more complex video display and things like that. And then we would do breakouts about what we did. And then the last set, we would do a full band with a quiet stage, which meant no floor monitors. And we would run an entire worship set with we had a worship band we called our lab band, and their only job was just to play so we could listen. It really wasn't about worship. It was a technical conference.
Right.
And so they would play, and then we would ask the question, when I would do the sound breakout, what was different about this set to you? And they would say, well, it sounded so much better, like out in the room. And it's because we weren't competing with those monitors that were just eating our lunch out in the room, because nobody had a floor monitor. There were no amplifiers on the stage anymore. We went through preamps and all that kind of stuff. The only thing that would have been live is the drums. Maybe at times we used electric drums, which every drummer just went, ugh! But we did just to show what it meant to be able to control some of those things. And so in-ear monitoring will revolutionize how your room sounds. How you do it will determine how well it's received and how well it works for you. And so that's some of the dynamics that we have to discuss, is kind of what are the pieces we need and how do we use it? How does it transform what we do? If you don't do it right, then people, your instrumentalists and your stage, they're going to push back and they're going to get frustrated. So you got to make sure that when you do it, they understand what you're doing, they understand why you're doing it, and that you do it right. And that doesn't mean you have to spend $1 million, but it means you've got to make sure you're set up right for it.
The other day, I was going through some of our stats on our YouTube channel, and one of the things that I noticed was that about 70% of the people that are watching this have not actually subscribed to the channel. So it's really cool that people are finding our content and finding our show and all that without being subscribed. But what's even cooler is when you guys do subscribe. So if you would, please do us the honor of hitting the subscribe button and hitting the notification bell. And if you really like this, then turn on all notifications so you can be notified anytime we do something on here, and we can stay in contact with you and you can stay up to date on what's going on. We'd really appreciate it. I appreciate you giving some of that explanation about what the monitoring is and why it's necessary. That makes total sense. So let's talk about the components, the pieces, the things that, if you and I were going to sit down with our stage and start putting together an in-ear monitoring system, then where would we start? What are the 4, 5, 6 components that are necessary to do that? And by the way, we've got links to all these in the description down below so that you guys can check it out. So be sure to go find those links and track them down and take a look at this stuff, because you actually may have have some of this stuff sitting at your church that's just not being used yet or being used properly. And if you don't, then obviously you can start moving in this direction. So, Curtis, where do we start? I mean, I'm sitting here with a set of in-ear monitors. These are, $25 in-ear monitors that are good for vocal, for I can hear you talk nice and quiet. I can keep my volume down on my speakers here in the office and not get any feedback. And I'm doing it for a very simple, practical purpose. But that's just a microcosm of what actually happens on the stage for the same reason, right?
Yeah. So when we talk about it, obviously components require other components to work. But the most basic level that we talk about is exactly what you were saying. We start by talking about the actual in-ear monitor we're using. Okay. This is, what am I putting in my ears?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have a set of $10 Sony earbuds, or you've got the whatever, the old Apple ones or whatever,
right? Yeah.
Those stink. They're terrible. Okay. Right. And if you plug them into a great piece of equipment, they're still going to sound terrible. And you're like, well, I don't know, I like them. I understand, but what we're talking about is in a live setting. We're talking about a lot of sound, a lot of things going on, and those earbuds are going to have to manage a lot. And so what you really want to do is make sure you're getting, really you want multi-driver in-ears. And all that means is it means there's more little speakers inside of there, basically more things to push sound and to kind of spread it out a little bit. And so the best thing to do is you've got to try things on, you've got to listen to them, but there are some industry standards out there that are good to go with. So for instance,
wait, I got a question. I got a question. Okay, hang on. It's stuck. There it is. Okay. So I see the stuff that you guys have at the church that you and Jason use and stuff like that. I have got this pair of $400 KEF, in-ear earbuds and stuff that have a very large driver and stuff like this. Could I use these as in-ear monitors? Would this work for doing that, or do I have to? I've heard the guys that get their ears molded and stuff like that and spend $1,000 or $1,200 on stuff like that. And do we have to go that route? I mean, obviously the super earbuds or whatever from Apple or whatever are junk for this, but I don't necessarily have to have my ears molded, do I?
No, and so the most common ones out there used are the Shure SE215s, and the SE215s are $100, or sometimes you can find them on sale for $90 or something like that. These are just a reliable product. They're going to be really good in your vocal range. They're going to do well with guitars. They do pretty well with keyboards. If you're a bass guitarist, they're not going to give you the low end that you probably would like to have. You probably want to get something with a little more oomph to it. And you may say $100 for a set of headphones, that's crazy. Well, they're professional quality headphones. They have a larger driver, which means that as you are listening to them, you're not going to have to push as much amplification to them. They're more efficient. So if you have really cheap ones, you're going to be cranking the level up, and they're going to distort and give you trouble. Whereas if you have something that's a professional quality, then you don't have to push it so hard, and you get a lot more out of it. Matter of fact, if you plug in a set of $20 headphones, and then you turn around and plug in the Shures, you're actually going to have to turn the volume down probably close to 40%, because you're going to be blowing yourself out. And so just know you get a lot more efficiency out of that. Now you may say, that's too much. It's just too much. I can't afford that. Well, there are more expensive and less expensive options for you. I've got a set right here that I actually use all the time, and we've got a slide for these too, but these are the KZs. They're the KZ S10s, and they're going to be $40, about maybe 50 if you don't get them on sale. Sometimes you can even get them for less. These are multi-driver in-ear monitors, and they're pretty good. As a matter of fact, compared to my Shure SE215s, I actually prefer these when I play keyboard. I think they do a better job with the keyboard. They have a little more low end and just a little punchier in that when I'm listening to the keys play. With vocal, I actually have some Westons that are like $80. There are all different kinds of companies out there that are making them, but you need to know that if you just go buy one that says it's cool on Amazon, then you're probably going to get junk. KZ makes some that are like $10 or $15. I have a set of them. that we have around is just kind of like the emergency backup. If somebody forgets their headphones or something, we throw them to them, and they work, but they're not very good. And
Right.
so you're definitely not going to find something of quality for 20 bucks that's going to work for this kind of setting. You need something that's going to be a little bit better, but you don't have to spend $100. If you do, you're going to find an extremely durable headphone that has a replaceable cable and some things like that that do make the Shure pretty interesting to have. Now, you can also spend a lot more, and if you do, you're going to get a better quality. I had $1,000 set of Shures that I used to use, and I mean the depth of range in those things was phenomenal. They
Mm-hmm.
sounded amazing, but they're $1,000. So as long as you can do that, then that's great. Did I need them to function? No, but when I was leading worship every single week and had those things in my ears, there's something about really having that well-rounded sound. And as the worship leader,
Mm-hmm.
it's really important that you can hear what's going on in each of your instruments. So you really
Mm-hmm.
want something that'll carry that. Now, if you're going to spend that kind of price, you probably really should be looking at something more like Ultimate Ears or 64 Audio. Now, those are the ones that Dave was just describing that have the molds. So literally, you'll go to an audiologist and you'll pay $100 to have them put goo in your ears and mold your ears. Then you'll send those molds to the company, Ultimate Ears or 64 Audio or whoever, and they will create a mold from that attaches to the headphone that then goes into your ear, and it creates a perfect fit, which does a couple of things. One, gives you total sound isolation and control. Two, they're very, very comfortable. So your ears don't get tired. So if you're, I used to do 3 morning worship services every
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, which meant I got to church and I would start to do sound checks by 7. And I wasn't done until, done wearing those until 12:30 or 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what would happen to me is I would just have this my ears would just be sore by
Mm-hmm.
the end. And then I'd come back a few hours later and put them back in for the next thing. But when you have molds, they're really comfortable and they just don't give you that ear fatigue that others do. Now, when you do that, you're looking at pretty expensive stuff. I mean, you can go over to 64 Audio and spend $5,000 on a set of headphones. They'll be amazing, I promise,
Mm-hmm.
but you will have to be willing to invest. Most of the worship leaders I know are using molds and using the UEs or 64 Audios or one of those kind of things that really is giving you that upper level quality because they wear them so much. It's like playing an instrument. I mean, I got my trusty J45 over here. It's an amazing instrument. I pick it up. I can play it longer than I can play any other instrument. It's extremely well designed. Putting these things in your ears, it's something you interact with every day, all the time. So the headphone, the in-ear monitor itself, is extremely important. And just a quick note, I really, really, really want to encourage you to stay away from using cans when you're using in-ear monitoring on your stage. Now,
You're
cans, I'm describing the big over-ear earmuff
yeah.
Princess Leia headphones, okay? You do not want your bassist to look like Princess Leia up there, okay? Now, I understand that your bassist wants to hear low frequency, and so they're getting
Mm-hmm.
a bigger speaker, they're getting a
Mm-hmm.
lot more oomph out of that, or your drummer, the drums are loud and they want to isolate or something like that. I get it. But guys, when people wear stuff like that on stage, they look like they're like streaming in from somewhere. They don't look connected to what's going on in the room. And the primary purpose of your instrumentalist is not to play pretty music, it's to engage your congregation and get them to participate in worship. And why are you going to do that if somebody looks like they're jamming out on their own in their own little world? Okay? So please,
That makes
please
sense.
move away from the cans. There's great in-ear stuff out there. You may say, well, my bassist doesn't like the in-ears. Sorry, get over it. They probably also want to have a 415 stack Ampeg on the stage, and you don't let them do that either
Right.
because no one would hear anything but the bass guitar. All right. So just realize you've got to be connecting with your people in the room. Don't let people isolate visibly. It'll hurt you, and it'll hurt people's involvement, they'll just figure that guy's jamming out on his own and you're putting on a show for them. And that is not what we're trying to accomplish in worship. So,
That makes
so
sense.
anyway, when it comes to the headphone aspect, those are some of the pieces. And there's tons of stuff out there. There's good products out there. There's bad products out there. But I can guarantee you the price tag will be connected. Good products will be a little bit more expensive. The headphones I recommend are Shure's and Westons when you're looking at around that $100 price range. If you're going up higher, look at Ultimate Ears and 64 Audios. If you're going lower, only thing I really like is the KZs. I really stay away from everything else. And so that would be kind of my input on the in-ears that we use.
Okay. So that is like the last stage, that's what goes into the musician's ear, the vocalist's ear and stuff. Let's back up one step. What's next, between that and the soundboard?
Yeah, well, so we have monitoring systems. We have lots of different options when it comes to this kind of thing. And so we can kind of talk through the different setups. Now, I'll start with what is the best setup in my opinion, and really extremely common. It's highly likely you may have some of this equipment in your church, and that is the in-ear monitoring systems. That is a system designed specifically just for in-ear monitoring. So that's your Aviom or your Behringer PowerPlay system, or we use Digital Audio Labs system. There's a lot of stuff out there, and we can talk about kind of some of the details about that. But we need to realize that these are units that are designed specifically for a personal use, okay? So it means I have a little mixer that I mix only what I want in it into my headphones, okay? And so that's going to be, if I'm playing guitar and leading worship, then I'm going to have my guitar turned up, I'm going to have my vocals turned up, I'm going to have maybe the drums in there, and maybe the keyboard if he's got some lead licks, and I probably don't have much of anything else in there because I really don't care what anybody else is doing. Those are the things I need to keep moving and keep going ahead. I may have the click in there or the track, or maybe if I've got another lead vocalist, then I would have them pulled up. Whereas that vocalist would probably have my guitar because it's kind of a lead instrument, maybe the keyboard, but they want to hear the other vocalist so they can harmonize with them or whatever. And so it allows the individual musician to create their own mix in their own ears through this. And real quick, the setup that you have can dictate what kind of in-ear monitoring system you need to use. You may say, what's the cheapest one? Well, there are some good options, very economically priced.
Okay.
But we got to start by asking the question of what kind of board are you using? So if you say, I'm using a Behringer X32, then I'm going to tell you should use the Behringer PowerPlay system. But if you say, I'm using a Digico board with Dante. Dante is a card that's in your board. It's a communication protocol that's really commonly used sometimes for digital snakes or for streaming. Like we use Dante to go back to our streaming board, which is a DAW that we can use. We use Dante to communicate a lot of different things. Dante is very versatile, but the PowerPlay unit doesn't speak Dante. Neither does Aviom. They don't speak Dante. If you're using Dante already, then you may want to go with something like Digital Audio Labs because it does speak Dante. And it's the whole reason we went with it, because we were kind of going with a Dante format. If you've got an Allen Heath board, you may choose to go with the proprietary Allen Heath in-ear monitoring system. Everybody kind of has their own. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can also pop a Aviom card in your digital board if you have a slot for it, and now you've got that communication. So there's a lot of different ways that your setup can dictate which piece of equipment you need and which is best for you. The one thing that's common in all of them is that there has to be some communication tool that's happening at your soundboard. And so the input module would be the first piece, and that input module is going to, if you're running analog or if you're not running through a card, that input module has inputs in it, 16, 24, it just depends on what you're using, and it digitizes that all into a Cat5 cable, just like a digital snake does, which you may be using right now, which a lot of this equipment doubles for digital snakes, by the way.
Hmm.
And so you
The
take
cat
that, you can plug into it.
the Cat
What that
5.
means is,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
networking cable. That's a like you connect your
right.
computer to your cable modem, that kind of a cable.
Yeah, it's
Right.
just a standard Ethernet cable for all
Gotcha.
these, not even
Okay.
special like Crosswire or anything like that.
Right.
So here's the dynamic of it. The whole input module concept is this. We are splitting the signal somewhere, whether normally before the board. So we have a splitter snake a lot of times, so that a certain set of inputs goes only into the input module and the other inputs go into my soundboard. It's also possible, depending on your board, to assign direct outs that then go, you're coming into your board and you assign direct outs that go out to your input module. Lots of different ways to handle it. You can also run through the input module out to your board. I actually don't recommend that. It can just get a little cumbersome. And all these input modules are TRS 1/4 inch, which means you're having to adapt everything. It's a real pain in the rear end. So you're best off really with a splitter snake or something like that if you're splitting your analog signal before you get there. Now, if you have a digital board, then you may still need that module. If you're running a Yamaha digital board and you're using a Behringer PowerPlay in-ear monitoring system, you're going to need to split out somehow and use the input module, because those two guys don't talk. All right, they're not going to be friends, and that may be the most cost-effective way for you to do it, and you'll get great quality out of it. I wouldn't steer you away from something like that, to be honest with you. But if you have a digital board that has card slots, then you can look at, hey, I could put an Aviom card in here. I can put a Dante card in that communicates, or something like that. If you're running a Midas board or a Behringer board, then your board is already speaking the language of the Behringer PowerPlay stuff,
Right.
and so you use that. But the input module, whether it's a card, Dante card, or a specific proprietary card that goes in your board, or you're running out through this module, is really important. It's the brain that you need that then digitizes everything to that Cat 5 Ethernet cable, so I can run it up, and I run it to my mixer, my in-ear mixer. Now, you've seen these, sitting on stages all around. Guys have headphones plugged into them. My in-ear mixer is going to provide me with the breakout, and it's where I can choose what channel I'm mixing, how I'm turning it up or down, all that kind of stuff. And with the mixer, we have the ability to manipulate each individual channel, and it's only impacted with what I'm hearing through that mixer. That's it. That's all I'm hearing. Nobody else is hearing it. Possibly nobody else can even be capable of hearing it, depending on your in-ear monitor system. Some of them allow you to solo or private, listen to a private mix so that you can help somebody. But dynamically, you're looking at, this is mine, I'm controlling it. So with most of these systems, I can run straight out of whatever my input module is into one of those mixers, and then I can mix it down, and I can run out of that mixer into the next mixer, and out of that mixer to the next mixer, daisy chaining them basically along the way.
Oh, okay.
Now, that's great, but there are some caveats to that. One, it's a lot of cables running to a lot of places, and when you daisy chain and one cable in the line gets wonky, it messes everything up, and Cat 5 cables notoriously go bad on you, okay? The other dynamic is that it'll mean each one of your mixers needs a power supply. It's got to plug into a wall wart somewhere to get its power. And so all these companies also offer what they call distribution modules, okay? And a distribution module is just what it sounds like. It takes my Cat 5 cable, my Ethernet cable that's coming in, I plug into the distribution module, and then it sends out, depending on the module, a bunch of additional Cat 5 cables to my mixers. I plug them in, and here's the other trick. They're PoE at this point with most of these things, which means I no longer need to plug into power. It's drawing power from the distributor through my Ethernet cable.
Okay.
Now,
so power. So PoE means power over Ethernet, right? So that is that means that the Ethernet port on there has one of those mini little cords that are in there has the actual electricity going down to power the unit as well as carrying all the data. All right, now are you talking about this, the something like this, the P16D distributor?
Yes.
Okay, because that looks to me like a standard type of gigabit Ethernet switch type deal, and that's basically what it is, right?
Basically is. It's basically a PoE switch.
Okay.
But it is proprietary, so it's network specific. So for instance, if you put anything that's not Behringer PowerPlay or that's not Aviom or whatever, depending on your system, if you put anything like that in line, it'll destroy the whole thing. And none of it'll work because it is all proprietary. They're all talking a specific language, and it's not the language that any router knows.
Gotcha.
So you can't ever put anything else in line. It's got to stay proprietary at that point. But yeah, that's the kind of thing. You send into it, and then it sends out power over the Ethernet cable, and it allows you to pull cables from specific locations instead of having to daisy chain them all along. It eliminates a lot of your failure opportunity. And the distributors really aren't that expensive when you look at the rest of what you're buying. And so they're usually worth it. And a lot of people use more than one distributor at times. You can actually use more than one so that you can spread them out on your stage, or you can wire to your stage and have plugs in your stage. Lots of different ways to handle it. But that's how the in-ear monitoring systems work. And sometimes you're like, I just need to go with the best price one that I can find. And for a lot of people, that
makes sense.
It's cheapest to go with the Behringer PowerPlay stuff. It's really good. It's very good. We use it in our upper room, which is where our youth and our college worship, and we love it. I've been very happy with it. But if you do that and you're not running a Behringer or a Midas board, you're going to have to go through that analog conversion through the input unit. So it's a little bit of a headache because of that, and it may not be worth it for you. As a matter of fact, for us, it wasn't worth it to go through that kind of thing when we knew that we could eliminate a lot of the mess and a lot of the failure opportunities with cabling by just going a Dante card out. And so that's what we did for that specific reason. But yeah, that's how in-ear monitoring systems work.
Okay. Very cool. Okay. So go out and buy one, guys. Thanks for, no. Okay. So talk to me about, you talked about the different, you've said Aviom, which I remember those. We had these boxes on the stage that were on a little mic stand right next to, the microphone or right behind the person, and they went over there and adjusted stuff. So, when you're looking at something, you mentioned Behringer, and I have always in my head, I look at somebody like Allen and Heath as like a higher end type of a thing. They're kind of the, I would say Mercedes, maybe they're the, they're like the high-end Samsung TVs that you're going to pay a lot for and you're going to get a lot out of. And Behringer, I've always thought of them as kind of like Vizio or TCL or something like that, where you get a lot of value and a lot of bang for your buck and all that. I mean, is it worth it to go down the road of a major investment, or is something like a Behringer setup that's going to cost you a few $1,000s or what have you? Is it something that, well, they're only going to last you about 5 years? They're not going to be as good. You're going to be replacing it more often, or is it like, no, as long as you're not sticking these things in road cases and bouncing them around the country and stuff, if they're just sitting there, you'll get 10 years of use out of them.
Yeah. So first of all, the Allen and Heath guys would be offended because they would say they're Aston Martins.
Oh, sorry,
those guys are
Aston
Bretts.
Martin.
And so they'd be highly offended.
Yes.
I mean, at least you didn't say BMW. Then they'd be really mad at you. But
or Austin. Well, they're not Austin Healey, so that's good.
Yeah. Well, true. So it's in a very small package. Anyway, but
y'all saw Mr. Bean with the little green Mini. They're not that either. Okay, so don't worry about that.
So I always explain audio equipment to people like their cars because everybody buys a car.
Sure.
So everybody knows that they can't afford the Mercedes, or everybody knows that they don't want to drive the Yugo, if you're old enough to know what a Yugo is.
Ah, yes.
The little 3-cylinder. But so Behringer is kind of the workhorse. Now, if you rewind when Behringer was hitting the market, they were just cheap and their stuff wasn't really good. They started copying Mackey's boards, and they got sued by Mackey because they copied them so closely, and they lost the lawsuit. But the truth was they were really producing a board that was somewhat comparable to the Mackie,
Right.
but the lifespan was shorter on those. We were seeing those boards fail in 5 to 7 years, whereas the Mackies were failing in 15 years.
Right.
And so we did see a higher failure rate. But when Behringer bought Midas, now we're talking 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not quite that long, but somewhere around 8 to 10 years ago, Behringer bought Midas. And when they did, Midas is it's a Mercedes soundboard company. Midas makes great stuff. And Behringer's always been a really smart company. And what they said was, okay, well, we're going to let Midas be Midas because they're going to make us a lot of money making really good boards. But they pulled two technicians from Midas who were working on a lower end digital board. And they said, no, you work for Behringer now because we want that board to come out in our Behringer line. And that board was the X32. And so it
Ah.
has Midas preamps and all kinds of stuff in it. It was designed by Midas technicians, okay? So that's why if you look at the Behringer X32, there's a Midas board that's almost exactly like it that you pay more for, and it has more features. There's some fancier stuff in it. It is a better board,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really the same board, just two different models of the same board.
That's
Okay.
cool.
And so like buying the Ford Ranger versus the Ford F-250, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's why the X32 has been such a good board, because it's a really well designed board by a super high end company, and Behringer's very smart in that they've continued to pull from that. Now, as time has gone on and everybody else has finally got into the digital board market, such as Allen Heath or Soundcraft, and it's not just PreSonus versus Yamaha, when
Right.
Yamaha was only putting out commercial boards, and then Behringer jumped in and blew everybody up by putting out a very inexpensive, high feature board as the X32. Now, in my opinion, in today's world of mixers, the X32 is actually an inferior board to a lot of the stuff that's out there that's pretty similar in price, that's being put out by Allen Heath and Soundcraft and some of those guys. I think are just better boards. But the X32 still a great board. I'm not knocking the board if you have it. I'm not saying terrible things about your soundboard, but its live use is just not as user friendly, and it's a lot more work now than it needs to be. So surely they'll continue to update it. They're kind of married to a setup right now. So it depends on what you're buying from Behringer. Now their PowerPlay system is a lower end in-ear monitor system. There's no question about it. But if you want to compare it to the original Aviom stuff, it's better. Aviom's still out there, making great products, building really good stuff. It's pricey, but it's really good, and it lasts forever. We have seen a little higher failure rate with the Behringer PowerPlay stuff, ports breaking and things like that, a little easier. But for the most part, they're pretty durable. They're pretty consistent with the other stuff in the market. And so I actually recommend the PowerPlay to lots of people, because to get the same quality of sound and manipulation, you really got to spend like 30-40% more most of the time. So the Behringers are a huge win if you're looking to get into the in-ear market and you're wanting to have that as a part of what's going on. Now, I will say this, just because you spend more doesn't mean you're getting more. Okay, so just because you buy an Aviom mixer, you're not going to plug in and say, well, this sounds better than the PowerPlay, or this has more features. It maybe doesn't. Now, one of the things that's a huge difference is that the PowerPlay and a lot of the Aviom stuff are still running off of 16 channel limitations. Their distribution is only for 16 channels on some of their stuff. On all the Behringer stuff, you can't get more. And so what that means is that for us, the Digital Audio Labs things that we use, they're 24 channels. And so you have that many more channels to work with. And obviously we're using more than 24 channels. We're using way more than 16 channels. And so that gives us a lot more manipulation and ability. And so just realize there are channel limitations to these kind of products. They're not limitless like a lot of the digital world is. And, I know guys who've run 2 sets of Cat 5s to be able to expand things and stuff. There's different ways, different products out there that are all worth trying out. But you do need to know that there are limitations to it. The Behringer units are very limited. There's not a whole lot of expansion options for them like some of the others offer. But as far as consistency and durability, I'd put them up against pretty much anything else I've used for the most
Okay.
part. They hold up really well. Now, some of Behringer stuff I would steer you away from, but in the in-ear market, I would use them. I wouldn't use their headphones, but I would use their power play setup. It's a very, very good, and we use it over here, and we actually use the input output module over there because we're running an Allen and Heath board, but
Mm.
we didn't want to pay Allen and Heath money for their mixers, and
Right.
so it just depends on your setup.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So now the stuff that we've been talking about with the in-ear monitors and stuff, I'm guessing that these people are like strapped to cords and all that, and you've got a bunch of cords running around there. Now, I know at our church, I see our people walking around with like in the one back pocket there's a wireless microphone pack, and in the other back pocket there's a wireless monitor, in-ear monitor pack and stuff. So do you recommend those? Is it just we had them so we're using them? I mean, pros, cons, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Is that the best thing to do? Are they radio frequencies? Are they Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, digital, 2.4 gigahertz? I
yeah.
mean, what are we talking about?
It all depends. Pretty much everything's gone digital at this point.
Mm-hmm.
As far as your frequency sets, all,
Right.
all the microphone companies have gone that way. So when it comes to wireless in-ear monitoring, it's kind of a double conversation. So none of the in-ear monitor companies make wireless in-ears, which just seems crazy. I've talked to these guys about it, and they're just like, the market's already saturated. There's already so many companies making good in-ear or wireless packs, wireless technology, that for us to build something ourselves and spend all the money developing it and all the money manufacturing it, and then we try to sell it to you, you already own these packs,
Right.
and so we can't make our money, and so they've just given up. I mean, at one point, there was one company was partnering with Shure, and they were supposedly going to release something that had Shure wireless technology in it, and then they just gave up. They were just like, and Shure decided they were going to make their own in-ear monitoring system, which didn't work, and so. But here's what it comes down to: wireless in-ears are standalone units, as it stands right now. They're standalone units, which means I send a signal to it, whether it's from a aux on my board or in-ear monitoring mixer. I send it into the sending unit, and it sends that to my wireless pack that then I plug my quality in-ear monitors into, and I listen to whatever that is. So what I'm saying is, it's not committed to a wireless, a monitor
An
system
infrastructure.
like
Right.
Aviom or PowerPlay or something like that.
Right.
It's actually any signal you send it. So if you have an auxiliary on your board and that's worship leader
Mm-hmm.
mix, then you mix it, and whatever you send out to that is going to go into his ear. What our church does, and what a lot of people do, is we actually run those off of our personal mixers, because that gives me the ability to go over and say, I want to hear more of my guitar and less of the drums and more of this vocalist, and it plugs out of that mixer
Mm-hmm.
into the wireless sending unit, then into my in-ears. So you can use them both ways. The reason we do that is because our vocalists are walking around the stage, and we don't want them tethered,
Right.
pulling over mic stands and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. People who are moving around on the stage, the worship leader, people who are walking on and off stage, things like that. It's really a pain to constantly plug and unplug, try not to trip over your wire,
Right.
or cross wires with somebody else. We end up with 30 feet of cable dragging across our stage. It
Yeah.
works. It's just a pain. Plus, it'll pull on them and make their ears pull
Right.
out, and so they'll constantly be messing with them on stage. So that's why we go with the wireless in-ears on our stage. It's convenience,
Mm-hmm.
so that the front of the stage stays clean and our people don't wrestle with it, while our keyboardist and our drummer, our bassist, electric guitarist, they're not going anywhere. They're standing right where they are. So they all plug in directly to the monitor mixer, and they can control it there. We don't need to spend the extra, what ends up being $700 or $800 on wireless in-ear packs
Mm-hmm.
and sending units, because they are expensive. And so you got to watch out for that, because they get a little pricey on you. That's why we only have a certain number of them.
Hmm.
They also have
Right.
batteries, which is a failure point. Anytime you have batteries, you've got an opportunity for something to stop working. You want to have as many as you need, but no more than you need, because if you put everybody on a wireless body pack, then you're creating some issues with signal drop
Mm.
or batteries and all those kinds of things that you have to deal with. The fewer of those you have, the fewer things you have to deal with, the complications that are created by the wireless technology. But they are available to you. I recommend the Shures. I just think that Shure has been doing it better than everybody else for a long time. And it's one of the main reasons that the in-ear companies haven't come out with their own, because they just can't compete with Shure. Now,
Hmm.
you can look and you can find stuff for half the price. It just doesn't work. You get a
Mm.
lot of interference, guys. You can deal with a
Yeah,
lot of dropouts, a lot of hiss, and people are going to get frustrated with them, and you're going to find you've just wasted your money by buying something cheaper.
that
Now,
makes
there are other
sense.
companies. Sennheiser makes one that's nice. There's some other companies out there doing it, but if you're going to pay the price for the Shures, buy the Shures. They last for a really long time. They'll be agile frequency, they'll sound good, and they'll be a consistent build that you can rely on. And so that's really, I highly
Okay.
recommend that.
Okay. So let's say we're a cash strapped church, which a lot of churches can be that way. It could be that way all the time, which I run into those churches, and then it could be we need this and we're in our low cash flow season. So what do we do? Do you have some hacks, some ideas, some the poor man's way to do set up in-ear monitoring, anything like that? I'm sure
Oh,
you
yeah. And I
do.
have done that many times.
Right.
So, first of all, so we'll talk about the less poor man, and then we'll talk about the poor man, right?
Okay.
Okay, because we all have stages of poorness in our life, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
It's a scale.
one of the things that churches do that it's not ideal, but at least it gets you moving in the right direction. You may say, "Hey, we want to do this, but we'd have to buy, 10 mixers, and they're hundreds of dollars each. We just can't do it." But we can afford the input module, and we afford the distributor in 4 mixers. Okay, so this is where you go into a hybrid mode where you say, okay, well, maybe we're still using some floor wedges, and so we still have some sound coming on our stage, but we've eliminated half of them. So normally you start with your instrumentalists, you start with your keyboardists first,
Hmm.
because they're always the loudest monitor.
Hmm.
Always the loudest monitor. Okay, your bassist and your drummer are going to be hot. Okay, so you want to eliminate those. Your electric guitarist, same thing, because they're trying to hear their instrument. So you really want to eliminate their floor monitors first, and then worry about your vocalists. But the other thing you have is a lot of churches say, well, I'm just going to put a splitter on one of these monitor mixes, and somebody's going to share a mix. It's not ideal, but normally you can put your bassist and drummer on the same mix, and they're going to be happy because they want to hear the same thing. Because
Okay.
bassists and drummers are basically playing the same thing.
The same
The
thing.
drummer's just way busier doing it. Okay,
Yeah.
and so what that means is that as you split that signal, they know maybe the bassist looks at the drummer and says, "Hey, can you turn the vocalist up or whatever?" But those guys are symbiotic, and so sometimes you do that, or sometimes you can share an in-ear monitor mix between a couple of vocalists who are harmonizing because they want to hear a lot of the same thing. Those kinds of things. That's one way to get started without having to just bite the whole thing off at once, because it can get very expensive,
Sure.
and allow you to say, next year we're going to add this many, next year we'll add this, whatever. The other dynamic is, and this is the poor man, and I actually own these mixers. I have been the poor man, okay? And there's a couple of different products out there that are personal in-ear amplifiers. Basically, you're running a signal from an auxiliary on your board, and is literally coming up and plugging into a mixer that hangs on somebody's belt, or is sitting on a stand, kind of like an Aviom or a Behringer PowerPlay mixer would. And they're receiving that signal. They have headphones plugged into it. They can turn it up or down. We have a couple of them listed, but the one I've used a lot is actually made by a company called Rolls. And people don't like a lot of what they make, but this is a really simple product. And if you look at it, you're going to see there's 2 knobs on it, because it's got this weird feature. You see, if you look at the one on the left, there's an XLR in and an XLR out. And then there's a 1/4 inch in as well. And this seems really strange, but it's because you can actually run your instrument through this mixer. You can run your mic through it if you're a vocalist, you can run your guitar through it or whatever.
Huh.
And as you run through it, it's just going to run right through and out to your soundboard. But then you can also plug a monitor mix from your board. And so what this means is you've got this rough monitor mix, say it's got a little bit of everything in it, but you have a volume control just for your instrument because it's actually 2 channels on
Wow,
there.
yeah.
And you're turning your own instrument up as loud as you want to, and it's only affecting your own in-ear because it has nothing to do with anything else going on. And then you
That's
have
pretty
this
smart.
rough mix that's got everything in it, and you can turn it up. And guys, it works. It
Yes.
really works. I've used it. I still have mine. I've got one sitting at the house right now that we used last year for something. It's just so simple and it's so smart, and it's like a $70 product. And so it's just really not that bad. I've had lots of luck with them. They're messy, okay? You got it up there, you got wires running through it and everything. So it is messy. But that's oftentimes what happens when we got to do stuff on the cheap. The product is good though, and it does work, and I've used them a bunch, and I know a lot of people have used them a bunch, and that's a way to use some of these features, but go ahead and keep from spending thousands of dollars, because now your bassist is running through there. He doesn't have an amp on the stage. He doesn't have that. Your keyboards are running through there. Each of them have their own units, but it's only $70 a pop. So I highly recommend that you kind of consider what that is. It's not ideal, but it is very functional, and that's a good thing.
That is awesome. Okay, so what before we before we go, what is like the most janky but functional setup you've had? I'm talking like we did this, we went through this, we had, you know, the guy with the rabbit ears stood there, you know, on a bucket and everything. I mean, what's the most, I can't believe this actually worked and we pulled it off, that you've done before, okay, besides almost burning down the Olympics?
The setup I built in 1999 was the jankiest thing, and this was before in-ear monitoring existed, but my stage was so loud I had to do something. And so I went out and I bought a multi-channel, I talked about this a little bit, a multi-channel headphone amplifier designed for a studio where you can plug a bunch of different headphones in it, and all of them get the same signal out of it. And so I had this set up. I had a couple of different ones of them, and we had auxiliary lines coming in from the board to the stage, and then we had headphones plugged in with extensions from this unit running everywhere on my stage. My cellist had one, my drummer had one, my bassist had one, each guitarist had one. That was 6 channels worth. And then, you know, keyboardist had one, the pianist had one. We had cables everywhere. I mean, it was a nightmare. When we had to tear down for weddings, the teardown took 3 hours and the setup took 5.
Oh my gosh.
By the time we were all done. It was insane.
You're kidding.
It was so complicated. It was a mess. Everybody's like, I got a buzz in my ear. Oh, that mix is bad. Will you turn me down? Because it's across the stage from everybody. Right. Will you turn me up? It was janky, man. And it was like, I did that for a while. And then we found those Rolls mixers. And I was like, we can use these. And we loved it. Everybody thought it was great. It was like a huge upgrade. And I'm describing that as like, you know, the jankiest thing now, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, that was it. Boy, it was bad. It was so bad. I'm surprised people didn't throw things at me when I put that together. But I was young, stupid, and poor. And so it's what we used. And it worked. It made our stage much quieter and made the room much more manageable.
That's awesome, Curtis. You're just a wealth of information when we talk about stuff like this. I love having you, on my team here, so that I don't have to talk in these theoretical, loose understandings that I have. We can actually get into the weeds with some of this. And folks, this kind of stuff is all big part of a church media creator ministry, right? So we don't do just video, we don't do just audio, we don't do just the live stage show. We've got the online show. We've got all these different components all coming together to produce the content that we want to put out there to get the gospel out, to change people's lives. And that's what we're doing here. So when we come back for our next episode, we're going to be going deeper with Curtis on some of this and talking about some looping, some click tracks, backtracks, how you use those effectively in your monitoring system, and even maybe add some of that stuff into the house mix. We're going to talk about all those kind of nuances and how you can make the best of those. So be sure to check this video right here. And remember, we are here to leverage the technology, amplify the gospel, and when that happens, then lives are changed. We'll see you in the next video.